I have seen some curious sights, and I have taken part in some equally curious affairs in the course of my career, but I can safely assert that the story I'm going to tell you now equals, if it does not excel, anything I've ever known. I've just come from South America, where I've been ranching for a good number of years, and having been more successful than a majority of men who go for that occupation, I returned to the old country with the intention of making it my home for the remainder of my existence. If you're prepared to spend money, it would not seem difficult to find a house of the description you require. Yet, only those who have ever tried it know what serious business it can be. One will be too large and without sufficient land, another too small with more land than you care to be bothered with. My wife and I have visited innumerable places, and at last we're beginning to despair at ever finding what we wanted. Then, quite by chance, I happened to hear the property of which this story was connected. It was necessary for me to visit Plymouth in order to meet the friend who was returning from Australia. The beauty of Devon is proverbial, and never prettier than in the autumn. After my long absence abroad, it had been a charm for me that I find it difficult to express in words. The dark red soil and luxuriant hedgerows and babbling brooks and the vast solitude of Dartmoor appealed to me with overwhelming force. This was a country for me. If only I could find the place for which I had been so long and wearily searching. While I was waiting the arrival of my friend's vessel, I made it my business to call on one of the leading house agents in order to make inquiries. Alas, for my hopes, he had nothing on his books that I had carried him to consider. I tried another and yet a third, but with the same result. There were houses that plenty in the town, but they were useless. There are others in the immediate neighborhood, but each had the same drawback. I bade the last agent good afternoon and turned to my hotel very disappointed with my ill success. That evening my friend arrived, and in the pleasure of welcoming him, I forgot for the time being my quest of residence. I was nearer success, however, than I imagined. On descending to the coffee room next morning, I found a letter upon my plate. It was from the first agent upon whom I called on the previous day. Quite by chance, he stated that he had appointed to here for an estate situated in a charming little village on the edge of the moor. The house was an old, picturesque one, and the property consisted of some 70 acres. Some site repairs would have been to be effected for the reason that the house has not been inhabited for some considerable time, nor being abroad and unable to keep it up. In conclusion, I was stated that the estate would rather be either let or on lease or sold outright. I carefully studied the particular enclosed, and as though I did, so began I feel that it really looked as if I had discovered what I wanted. When my friend descended, I told him the news, and invited him to remain a day longer in order to come with me and inspect it. He considered to do so, and that afternoon we chatted and carriaged and drove out. There are reasons why I suppress the name of the village. They will, I expect, be obvious to you. Give a dog a bad name and hang him. May apply as well to the property as to the canine race. the hall, as the place was called. It was the further side of the village. It was on the very edge of the moor. The agent had described it exactly when he had declared it to be the picturesque old building. It stood on high ground, and immediately behind it rose a steep side of Brin, crowned with enormous boulders that gave it a strangely wild appearance. The house itself was approached by a lengthy carriage drive, and it was later had been built in the days of George I. From the first moment that I saw it, I liked it. We drove up at the steps and alighted. I presented the housekeeper with the order to view, whereupon she examined it as if it was the banknote for £1,000, and she was not quite certain as to whether it was genuine. At first, however, she considered to admit to us that we entered the large square hall, as it was paved, and I must confess that it did not present a very inviting appearance. The oak paneling, however, was handsome, while the grand staircase was massive and finely carved. With no very good grace, the old woman threw open the door of the room which I judged to be the dining room. Thence we proceeded on our tour of investigation. The house, with the exception of the kitchen and the bedroom, was quite unfurnished and certainly stood in need of repair. It possessed, however, the great abilities, and I felt sure, when finished and put together in order, it would make a charming dwelling. By the time our inspection was finished, the afternoon was all advanced, and if we desired to get back to Plymouth for the time of dinner, it behooved us to start at once. That evening, I wrote a long description of what I had seen to my wife, inviting her to join me in order that I might have her opinion. Next day she arrived. She proved to be as charmed with it as I was in the end of the week. Following letters were excellent, trim for my becoming as its owner. As soon as the necessary legal formalities had been completed with, my wife set off for London on future buying thoughts instant, while I remained behind to hurry on to work and had it completed before we could come to residence. At least, it was the second week in November, if my memory serves me. The furniture began to arrive. A makeshift bedroom was prepared for me, so I exchanged the hotel in Plymouth for my own abode. For the next few days, my life was not altogether for a bed of roses. Everything had been arranged. The servants were new, while the furnishers' men required strict supervision to prevent them from spending a greater part of their time at the village inn. However, it was all done at last, and I felt when my wife gave it to a few finishing touches, which only a woman can do, to be as nearly as perfect as a man could wish to have his home. It was on the day that my wife arrived, and curious circumstances occurred, which it was purpose of this story to relate. We had finished dinner and were in our drawing room, discussing affairs in general and wondering when the butler was going to bring in coffee. "I'll tell him we would have it immediately after dinner," said my wife. I rang the bell almost immediately, and he appeared in answer to it. He looked around the room and surprised us if he was expected to find a third person present. "We will have the coffee, Sampson," said my wife. "Always let us have it as soon as at the dinner as possible." "You will excuse me, madam, but I thought you were engaged with a lady." "I have seen no lady." He looked at her in bewilderment. "A lady came up the hall," she said, "as she left the dining room, and I thought she came here." I looked at the man sharply. Apparently he was sober. You must have dreamt it, I continued. No, sir, I'm quite sure I did not. I saw her quite distinctly, and you would know against anywhere. She seemed in great trouble, so this is why I did not disturb you. I'm very sorry, sir. He departed, bringing the coffee. When he returned, I asked him to describe the person in question more minutely. I gathered that she was tall and had a beautiful face, but with a very sad expression. She was dressed entirely in black and had what he called a black lace shawl upon her head. The man was deeply in earnest, but I could make neither head nor tail of it. Let us look around, I said. I'm quite sure that the hall door has not been opened since dinner, and if she's in the house now, we shall doubtlessly find her. Accompanied by my wife, we set out and visited all the rooms on the ground floor, not omitting the servants' hall. My wife's questioned the maids. One and all asserted that they had not been into a hall since dinner. We next tried all the rooms upstairs, with the same result. Some mysterious black lady, if she had existed, was certainly not in the house. I felt more than ever convinced that the man must have fallen asleep in the pantry and dreamed it. But we were not done with her yet. A week or so afterwards, and we were all quite settled in. One of the maids who had been down to the village declared that on the path she led through this shrubbery on the side gate, she met a lady who seemed in great distress. According to the girl's story, she was wringing her hands. It was too dark for the maid to see her face. "You're quite sure of what you're saying?" I asked when Simpson brought the girls to presence. "I'm quite sure, sir." "I'm quite sure, sir," was her reply. "I held the gate open for her to let her pass through." "Did she speak to you?" "Not a word, sir. She just went by me as if she did not see me." This was really one of the strangest things I've ever heard, I said to my wife when we were all alone together. "I wonder who the woman is, and by why right she trespasses on my grounds. Yet I might meet her. I shall put the question to her." Christmas was now drawing near, and we were invited at a large house party to spend the festive season with us. Among the number was a young fellow named Desborough, who had just got his troop in a Lancer regiment. We had placed him in a room with a bachelor's wing, which was the oldest portion of the house. He and I were the first two to reach the drawing room before dinner. "I say, old man," he began, "how many people have you got in the house?" I told him. "Yes, but who's the other one?" "The lady in the sofa contents." "A jolly pretty one at that." "There's no one else there to play." "I've given you the names of all of them." "Well, that's funny. Well, I swear she was no housemaid, and I've seen your wife's maid. Are you sure you're not rotting me?" "Perfectly sure. I'll describe this mysterious individual to me." "Describe this mysterious individual to me." "Well, I'm not much of a hand at that sort of work, but I know that she was real jolly good looking, with what looked like a laced mantilla on her head. She seemed to be rare trouble. She was wringing her hands, looked so sorrowful at me, and for a moment I was almost tempted to ask her what was the matter. "Wait here a moment," I said. I ran upstairs to see if I could discover who this person can be. I did so, muttering as I went, getting a little tired of the lady's visits to my house. But though I searched the bachelor's wing and such other rooms as I could enter, no trace of her could I discover. I returned to the drawing room and informed Desborough of my ill success. Well, can you say what you like? He answered. I saw her plainly as I can see you now. Thus the matter dropped the time being. My wife was the next to be favored of a glimpse of her. In a way, Christmas Eve, and the ladies had been down to the church to decorate the edifice of the next day. It was almost dark when they started to return. Well, my wife remained behind the party about 10 minutes to discuss certain matters with the vicar. It was snowing heavily when she left the church, and the country looked indescribably beautiful in the light of the full moon. Her version of the story was that she had left the shrubbery, and she was passing along the path that ran at the foot of the terrace, when she stood up and saw the woman, dressed in black, leaning with her hands upon it, looking down at her. She declares that this day that she was too surprised to be frightened, or to say anything. Then the woman walked away from her, wringing her hands as if she were in great grief. 3 minutes could not have elapsed before I had been told, and I was out of the terrace in pursuit. Well, I looked about, but there was no sign of her, and, stranger still, there was not a footmark, either on my own upon the snow. The matter was getting beyond me. I could not make a head of it or tail of it. Next day, after the morning service, I told the vicar outside, and he didn't give me any clue to the mystery. I told him that the matter was getting serious. The servants declared that it was a ghost, and, in consequence, they were threatening to leave me. Well, I will not deny, he said, that something of this sort of thing has been the village gossip for a great many years, and more than one person has laid claim of seeing it. Personally, I've never done so. The story goes that it is the spirit of a Spanish woman who once the mistress in the house. If you come into the church again, I'll show you what the tablet of her memory. I followed him to discover the inscription in question. It described her for reasons already stated that I will not give her name, as being the wife of the owner of the house, and also set forth the fact that she died in the year 1782. There's not much to be gained from that, I said, but the coincidence is, to say that at least, from the singular. I then thanked him and rejoined my party. The evening was developed into the unusual amusements associated with the season. I'm afraid we all very juvenile, and must have shocked the grave Simpson. We played dumb crambo, acted charades, and at last came to thought reading. In my turn, I went out of the room while an experiment was preparing. The hall was brilliantly lighted, and I gave you my word that I had no thought of the mysterious lady. And at that moment, suddenly, I liked to see her passing along the corridor at the top of the great staircase, in the direction of the bachelor's quarters. Seizing a hat and coat, ran up the stairs just in time to see her turning around the corridor. I set off in the pursuit. She was evidently making her way to a little door I saw that led to a flight of steps in the garden below. By the time I reached it, she had disappeared. But throwing open the door, I saw her passing swiftly along the garden path towards the shrubbery. Donning my hat and throwing on my coat, I continued my chase. She passed out of the wicket gate and turned into the narrow lane that led towards the tor. It was a night of a full moon, and was almost as light as day. Without leaving any track upon the snow, she sped on such a rate that I had great difficulty keeping in sight. At last, she reached the foot of the tor and began the ascent. It was more than I bargained for it must have be remembered that my feet were in the evening dress shoes, and that the snow was like inches deep beyond the ground. However, having come so far, I was determined to see what the end of it would all be. Staggering, falling, I began to climb, back, the black figure speeding on ahead of me, never pausing a moment, at least. At last I reached the summit, and stood. Well, perhaps I could have encountered 20 upon the topmost boulder. It made a weird picture, I can assure you. Then she raised her arms above her head and fell through the air to the rocks nearly 200 feet below. On my honor, it was so real that I gave a great cry as I saw it. I scrambled down to see if there was any sight of her. There was none. The tragedy ended with her death. I was home scarcely able to believe the evidence of my senses. Next day, I took Dursborough to the top of the tor with me and described the scene to him. I believe he thought I had dreamt it all. He stood at the foot and looked up at it. By Jove! It would be a great ghastly place to take a leap from, he said. Is that a cave up there? He pointed halfway up the face of the cliff. There certainly was a cave there. Perhaps this is the clue of the mystery, I cried. A man could be lowered to the top from the top. As soon as the snow goes, I'll have a look at it. A week later, I took several men and a strong rope and visited the tor once more. After having taken every precaution, they lowered me over to the cliff till I reached the narrow entrance to the cave. I managed to squeeze myself in and then lit a candle which I had brought with me. 3 steps took me a little fair sea's cavern, and showed me a strange and terrible sight as a man could ever looked upon. Stretched upon the floor was the skeleton of a man. Scattered around him were the remains of books and what might once have been a blanket. I took up one of the books, and later discovered I found the name of the man whose wife's tablet I have seen in the village church on Christmas Day. Later on, I examined it carefully. Inside was written, I am dying of starvation. They will not let my wife bring me food. I have destroyed the papers. Farewell, my beloved wife. This mystery was solved. The poor remains were brought down from their long resting place indecently interred. Since then, the Black Lady, as the village folk call her, has not been since. I do not pretend to account for it. I simply give you the story.